Hello everyone, good morning. This is presidential candidate Austin Petersen for the Libertarian Party. Today we're going to be talking about the 10 different types of libertarians, and obviously a lot of this is going to be coming into contention because we all like to believe that, oh, we are the real types of libertarians. But in doing research for this video, I found that there are actually quite a few more strains of libertarianism than even I could have named off the top of my head. So today, I'm going to be talking about these different types of libertarians, and I'll also name the different types of people who would embody these types of libertarian thought. But before I do, of course, I want to say don't forget to support the campaign to take over the government and leave everyone alone. Go to austinpetersen2016.com and send us your donation today of at least $3, and of course you can register as a volunteer for the campaign as well. The first type of libertarian on my list is an anarcho-capitalist, which many of you might be familiar with. Of course, we hear a lot about them nowadays. Anarcho-capitalists believe that governments monopolize services that would be better left to corporations and should be abolished entirely in favor of a system in which corporations provide services that we normally would associate with government. The popular sci-fi novel, Jennifer Government, describes a system that is very close to anarcho-capitalist. And some famous anarcho-capitalists would, of course, be Murray Rothbard or Samuel Konkin. And I believe nowadays, I think that Lew Rockwell calls himself an anarcho-capitalist as well, and so does Robert Murphy and Tom Woods. So those are examples of modern libertarians who consider themselves to be anarcho-capitalists. The second type of libertarian is a civil libertarian. And civil libertarians believe that government should not pass laws that restrict, oppress, or selectively fail to protect people in their day-to-day lives. Their position can be summed up by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who said that a man's right to swing his fist ends where my nose begins. In the United States, the American Civil Liberties Union represents the interests of civil libertarians. Civil libertarians may or may not be fiscal libertarians. And a good example of that might be Daniel Ellsberg, who revealed the Pentagon Papers. He may not be a fiscal libertarian, but he is a civil libertarian. And before I move on to the next one, don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, you can leave some questions in the chat below the live stream right now. If you leave your questions there, I'll try and get to them at the very end of the show. And of course, don't forget to go to austinpetersen2016.com and send us your donation today. The next type of a liberal, or excuse me, yes, a liberal, an actual liberal, is a classical liberal. Classical liberals agree with the words of the Declaration of Independence, that all people have basic human rights, and that the sole legitimate function of government is to protect those rights. Most of the founding fathers and most of the European philosophers who influenced them were classical liberals, and someone like that might perhaps be John Locke. Classical liberal today perhaps might be someone like Matt Zwolinski, perhaps. Frederick Bastiat might be an example of a classical liberal. Friedrich Hayek might be an example of a classical liberal. And why would I classify him as a classical liberal rather than perhaps what I am? Well, Friedrich Hayek, of course, did sort of flirt with the idea of a guaranteed basic minimum income. And of course, there was Milton Friedman, who would be perhaps a classical liberal in the sense, he wasn't a hardcore anarcho-capitalist, he was more of a classical liberal. And that was because he sort of made deals with the Federal Reserve, for example. He wanted to have if we're going to have a Federal Reserve, he wanted to have a set inflation rate. So the economists of the Chicago School, the Chicago Boys as they are sometimes called, I would refer to them perhaps as classical liberals. The next type of a libertarian is a fiscal libertarian. Fiscal libertarians, also referred to as laissez-faire capitalists, believe in free trade, low or non-existent taxes, and minimal or non-existent corporate regulation. Most traditional Republicans are moderate fiscal libertarians. The next type of libertarians are Geo Libertarians. And I actually had never even heard of a Geo Libertarian, and I've been a libertarian all my life. So this is very interesting. Listen to this. Geo Libertarians are also called one-taxers. They're fiscal libertarians who believe that land can never be owned, but may be rented. They generally propose the abolition of all income and sales taxes in favor of a single land rental tax, with the revenue used to support collective interests, such as military defense, as determined through a democratic process. And the reasoning behind Geo Libertarianism, as I've read it this morning and studied, is that because land is the one type of a resource that if you own it, then no one else can use it, right? And in a capitalist economy, of course, if we can trade goods and services, and I can own money, you can own money, I can have a television, you can have a television, but land is the kind of a thing that there really is no more. It's a finite type of a resource. So a geo-libertarian is someone who says, let's get rid of the income taxes, let's get rid of sales taxes, and let's just have this one land rental tax, and that would be the only form of tax we would have. That would be considered a geo-libertarian. Libertarian socialism. This is the one that everybody is going to freak out with. And again, I'm just pulling this from my research, of course. Libertarian socialists agree with anarcho-capitalists that government is a monopoly and should be abolished. But they believe that nations should be ruled instead by work-share cooperatives or labor unions instead of corporations. The philosopher Noam Chomsky is the best-known American libertarian socialist. And of course, I wouldn't be a good libertarian if I didn't get a dig in there. But of course, the libertarian socialists, I believe, really just end in communism because it does demand equanimity. Rather, it forces us all to be equal and equally poor, in my opinion. Now here's my type of libertarianism, minarchism. Like anarcho-capitalists and libertarian socialists, minarchists believe that most functions currently served by the government should be served by smaller, non-government groups. But they believe that a government is still needed to serve a few collective needs, such as military defense. And that, of course, would be embodied by Leif Beaverson himself, Austin Petersen, sitting right here in front of you, or perhaps Robert Nozick might be a good example of someone who was a minarchist. And I do call myself a constitutional libertarian, but sometimes people don't understand what that means when I say, what is a constitutional libertarian? Well, a constitutional libertarian is a minarchist in the sense that I believe in a constitution, the idea of a constitution, that we have a right to create a government amongst ourselves, that governments are drawn up among men to protect the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But just because I consider myself a constitutionalist doesn't mean I support this Constitution. And that's a very important distinction because I think that our current Constitution has problems and those problems need to be addressed. So perhaps if I were to rewrite the Constitution, I would make this government even smaller and I would bind it down into an even smaller version than what we have today, perhaps no income tax. Neo-libertarianism. What is this? Neo-libertarians are fiscal libertarians who support a strong military and believe that the U.S. government should use that military to overthrow dangerous and oppressive regimes. It's their emphasis on military intervention that distinguishes them from Paleo Libertarians and gives them reason to make common cause with neoconservatism. Now, when you talk about that, think about it like this. Of course, if you're an anarchist and you don't believe in borders, and again, we're just using thought processes here. Don't get your panties in a twist. A neo-libertarian perhaps is someone who says if there are no borders, if they agree with the anarcho-capitalists that borders are just imaginary lines drawn on a map, well then, it may be libertarian to go into a country and intervene and to free people from oppression. Certainly Gary Johnson, the former governor of New Mexico, argued that we needed to go and try and find Coney. And he's still considered a libertarian, but that would be an intervention. And it would be something that he might agree with on neoconservatives, but I wouldn't classify Gary Johnson as a neocon, certainly not. But a neo-libertarian is someone who sees no borders around the world, and that if someone is being oppressed, that we have a responsibility and a duty to free them and to bring them liberty. And that's where they do find common cause with neoconservatives. I think that sometimes, and as a minarchist, I believe that intervention itself should be looked at skeptically. But of course, if the French had not intervened in the American Revolution, we might still be singing God Save the Queen instead of Yankee Doodling. So it's something to think about. Objectivism. The Objectivist movement was founded by the Russian-American novelist Ayn Rand, author of Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, who incorporated fiscal libertarianism into a broader philosophy emphasizing rugged individualism and what she called the virtue of selfishness. And of course, Ayn Rand did create that philosophy, and there are many objectivists today. It's something very important to understand. The objectivists, I think, have wrongly been pushed out of the libertarian group. I think we need to have a strong sense of Ayn Rand. I think there is some virtue in selfishness, because when it's just like what Adam Smith said. It's not through the benevolence of the butcher that we get our daily meat, but out of his own self-interest. So because he's serving his own self-interest and making money, that's the reason that everyone can have their nice roast beef, which I will have today for lunch. The last type of libertarian, the 10th type of libertarian, is a Paleo Libertarian. Paleo Libertarians differ from Neo-Libertarians in that they are isolationists who do not believe that the United States should become entangled in international affairs. They also tend to be suspicious of international coalitions such as the United Nations, liberal immigration policies, and other potential threats to cultural stability. And this might be someone who agrees with libertarians, perhaps a Ted Cruz, for example. Now, he's more of a traditional conservative, but if he's libertarian at all, then he would fall under the Paleo Libertarian. This is someone who fears the rise fears immigration and is skeptical of liberal immigration policies in the classical liberal sense. So guys, tell me a little bit more about what you'd like to see. Do you have any questions? Don't forget to go to austinpetersen2016.com and send us a $3 donation today. As you may have heard, Governor Gary Johnson might be getting in the race soon, so we're about to have a David versus Goliath battle. Logan Flickenstein, I'll answer a few questions before I sign off. He says, do you think it's possible logically that a constitutionalist can reject libertarianism? If so, what are some examples of this? Well, that's a very good question there, friend. I think that it's possible that a constitutionalist can reject libertarianism, because if you're a constitutionalist in the sense of the Constitution that we have today, Logan, then you necessarily must defend the income tax, for example, or you must defend the 17th Amendment, which is one of the more egregious losses of liberty, or anti-democratic. It's more democratic, but it's anti-republican. So what the 17th Amendment did, in a sense, was it made it so that senators were directly elected instead of elected by state legislatures, and so that's more democratic. But I believe that in a constitutional republic, we need anti-democratic checks, because sometimes the will of the people, masses, can be fickle, and we do need to have a check and balance on that as well. So if you're a constitutionalist, perhaps in the American constitutional sense, it's in a sense, I believe, anti-libertarian to defend the Constitution such as it is today. And that's why, of course, I always say, you can't simultaneously say, I'm going to believe in the non-aggression principle while running for the President of the United States, simply because the President of the United States is not a libertarian job. Or you're required to violate the non-aggression principle your first day of office. All right, so I don't see any other good questions in there, or at least ones that perhaps I can answer off the top of my head. Thank you very much for watching our live stream today, ladies and gentlemen. Don't forget to go to austinpetersen2016.com today and leave us a nice donation. You can also, if you're in the Midwest, I will be speaking this Saturday at the Kansas Libertarian Party's Executive Committee, and I'm starting to formulate my schedule this year as I get around the country to speak at different libertarian events. So, of course, you need to send us a little bit of cash so we can have some gas in our tank. Thank you very much for watching our live stream, and have a great day.